The security footage rolled in silence across my laptop screen. Timestamp marking 3:47 a.m. I'd been dead for 6 months, according to public records. Yet here I was in my downtown apartment, watching my husband David marry another woman in what used to be our garden. The ceremony had taken place just hours ago, and the cameras I'd secretly installed before my death had captured every devastating moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I rewound the footage, studying the bride's face. Rebecca Chen, my former best friend, wore my grandmother's vintage lace dress, the one I'd specifically mentioned wanting to save for our daughter's wedding someday. David had told me he'd donated all my clothes to charity. Apparently, charity began at home. The irony was exquisite. 6 months ago, I'd faked my own death to escape what I thought was a loveless marriage, only to discover from beyond the grave just how quickly love could be replaced. Now, as I sat in my carefully constructed afterlife, I realized I'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. My name is Isabella Martinez, though the world knew me as Isabella Hartwell for 8 years of marriage. What the world didn't know was that Isabella Hartwell had died in a carefully orchestrated car accident in Montenegro, her body supposedly lost to the Adriatic Sea. What they also didn't know was that Isabella Martinez, freelance security consultant, had been very much alive, watching, waiting, and planning. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Months of preparation, forged documents, bribes to the right officials, and a staged accident that left no recoverable body. I'd even hired a grief counselor to help David through his loss, monitoring his sessions through the bugs I'd planted in our home. I thought I was being kind, giving him the freedom he seemed to crave without the messiness of divorce. How naive I'd been. The security feed showed David's face as he slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger, not the face of a grieving widower forced into a hasty rebound, but the face of a man who'd been waiting for this moment. His smile was broader than I'd seen in years. His posture was relaxed, confident. This wasn't desperation or loneliness driving him to the altar. This was relief. I paused the footage, studying their faces. The timestamp read 4:23 p.m., exactly 6 months to the day since my supposed death. They hadn't even waited for the traditional year of mourning. In the background, I could see our mutual friends, colleagues from David's law firm, even my own sister Maria laughing and celebrating. Not one person looked uncomfortable about the timing. Not one person seemed to think 6 months was too soon. My laptop chimed with a new email. The private investigator I'd hired under an assumed name had sent his final report. Marcus Webb, former NYPD detective turned corporate security, had no idea his client was the supposedly dead wife he'd been investigating. His report was thorough, damning, and completely devastating. Subject: Final report, David Hartwell investigations. Martinez, per your request, I've completed the comprehensive investigation into David Hartwell's activities following his wife's death. The findings are more extensive than initially anticipated. Timeline of events. May 15th. Isabella Hartwell reported dead in Montenegro accident. May 18th. David Hartwell begins regular visits to Rebecca Chen's apartment. May 22nd. Joint bank account established between Hartwell and Chen. June 1st. Chen moves into the Hartwell residence. June 15th. Wedding venue booked at the Hartwell property. July 3rd. Marriage license obtained. November 15th. Wedding ceremony performed. Financial analysis. Isabella. Hartwell's life insurance policy, $2.3 million, was claimed and received within 30 days of death certificate filing. Property deed for the Hartwell residence was transferred to joint ownership between David and Rebecca on July 1st. The deceased's personal accounts, totaling approximately $890,000, were liquidated and transferred to accounts under Hartwell's sole control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Personal relationships. Investigation reveals the relationship between David Hartwell and Rebecca Chen predates the deceased's death by approximately 14 months. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and witness statements confirm regular meetings beginning March 2023. Subject: Chen was present at the Hartwell residence on numerous occasions when the deceased was traveling for work. Additional findings attached in encrypted files. Invoice for services rendered. $15,000 regards. Marcus Webb-Eye stared at the screen, processing the timeline. 14 months. They'd been together for 14 months before my death. I'd been planning my escape from a marriage I thought was loveless while my husband was planning his escape from a wife he'd already replaced. The encrypted files painted an even more damaging picture. Photographs of David and Rebecca at romantic dinners during my business trips. Screenshots of text messages with timestamps proving their affair had been ongoing throughout my final year of marriage. Hotel receipts from weekends when David claimed to be at legal conferences but was actually 2 states over with Rebecca. One photograph made my blood freeze. David and Rebecca at a jewelry store, dated 3 days before my supposed death. The receipt showed a purchase of wedding rings, not just any wedding rings, but the exact set I'd admired months earlier and mentioned wanting to upgrade to someday. They'd been shopping for their wedding rings while I was still alive. I opened another file, this one containing witness statements. David's secretary confirmed she'd been instructed to clear his calendar for a personal matter on the day after my death was announced. Rebecca's neighbor reported moving trucks at her apartment the week of my death, with boxes being loaded rather than unloaded. They'd been planning to move her in before they even knew I was gone. But the most devastating evidence was a recorded phone conversation between David and his brother, captured by the listening devices I'd planted in our home before my disappearance. "I still can't believe she's really gone," David's brother said. "Honestly, Mark, it's the best thing that could have happened." David's voice was clear through the surveillance equipment. "I was already planning to ask for a divorce. This just makes everything cleaner." "Jesus, David, that's your wife you're talking about. Was my wife. And she was never really my wife, not the way Rebecca is. You know how Isabella was, always traveling, always working, never really present. Rebecca makes me feel alive again. The timing seems fast, bringing Rebecca around so soon. Life is short, Mark. I learned that the hard way. Besides, Bella left me everything. The house, the accounts, the insurance. She'd want me to be happy." I'd paused the recording there, unable to listen to more. The casual way he spoke about my death, about everything I'd left him, made it clear that my demise had been more convenience than tragedy for David. Now, watching the wedding footage again, I noticed details I'd missed before. Rebecca wasn't just wearing my dress, she was wearing my jewelry too. My mother's pearl necklace, my grandmother's diamond earrings, even the vintage bracelet I'd inherited from my aunt. David had told people he'd donated my jewelry to charity as well. Apparently, Rebecca Chen was quite the charitable organization. I pulled up the financial records Webb had provided. The life insurance payout had been processed with unusual speed thanks to David's connections at his law firm. He'd filed the death certificate and insurance claim simultaneously, as if he'd been prepared for exactly this scenario. The money had been deposited into their joint account 3 days before their wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I'd been getting them for weeks now, anonymous messages that seemed to know more than they should. This one read, "The Foundation charity dinner is next week. You should attend. Table 7 has an interesting seating arrangement. The Hartwell Foundation. I'd established it 5 years ago to support women escaping domestic violence, funding safe houses and legal aid. The annual dinner was always held in November, and David, as my widower, would be giving the keynote speech about carrying on my legacy." The irony was thick enough to choke on. I opened my laptop's secure partition and began typing a new identity profile. Victoria Ashford, successful tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley, recently relocated to the East Coast for business expansion. Wealthy enough to buy a table at charity dinners, mysterious enough to blend into high society without too many questions, and attractive enough to catch David's attention if necessary. The charity dinner would be my debut back into society 6 months after my own funeral. The guest list would include everyone who'd attended my memorial service, everyone who'd offered David their condolences, everyone who'd helped him grieve his terrible loss while he was secretly planning his new life. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of their deception. The security footage from the wedding was just the beginning. I needed to know how long they'd been planning this, how many people were complicit, and most importantly, how they'd managed to orchestrate everything so smoothly. I pulled up another encrypted file Webb had provided, Rebecca's personal communications. Her email account had been surprisingly easy to hack, protected by a password that was simply David and Rebecca 2024. Sometimes the guilty make things too easy. The emails told a story of calculated planning. Messages between Rebecca and David dating back 18 months, long before my death, discussing when we can be together publicly. Rebecca's communications with wedding planners, dated from 2 months before my disappearance, planning a November celebration for when the situation resolves itself. One email exchange made my hands tremble with rage. From Rebecca Chen to David Hartwell. Subject: insurance question date, April 3rd, 2024, darling. I know we don't like to talk about this, but I need to ask. Are you certain the insurance policies are all in order? My friend Sarah went through something similar when her husband died in that boating accident, and she said timing can be everything with these claims. I love you, and I just want to make sure we're protected when we can finally be together openly. Forever yours. R. From David Hartwell to Rebecca Chen. Subject: Insurance question. Date: April 3rd, 2024. My love, everything is arranged. The policies are substantial, and the beneficiaries are clear. Montenegro was chosen specifically because their accident investigation protocols are less rigorous than domestic cases. My contact there has confirmed the process will be expedited. Soon we'll have everything we need for our new life together. Isabella's travels make the scenario perfectly believable. Everyone knows how often she's in dangerous locations for work. Trust me, I've thought of everything. All my love, D.I. read the exchange 3 times, processing the implications. They hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been actively planning my death. Not my actual death, of course. They couldn't have known I was planning to fake it. But they'd been planning for my death nonetheless, researching insurance payouts and investigation procedures. The phrase, Montenegro was chosen specifically, caught my attention. I'd chosen Montenegro for my fake death because it was remote, because their records were difficult to verify, because it would be easy to disappear there. But according to David's email, he'd chosen Montenegro too, as the perfect place for a convenient accident. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. David and Rebecca hadn't just been planning their life together after my death. They'd been planning my death itself. The only reason I was alive was because I'd beaten them to it, faking my own murder before they could commit the real one. I needed more information. I needed to know how far they'd planned to go, who else might have been involved, and most importantly, I needed evidence that would hold up in court when I decided to rise from the dead. My secure phone rang. Unknown number again, but this time I answered. Isabella. The voice was male, older, familiar but not immediately placeable. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number. This is Victoria. We both know that's not true. I've been watching you watch them. My blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who knows you're not as dead as everyone thinks. Someone who has been waiting for you to make your move. What do you want? To help. David and Rebecca aren't the only ones with secrets, Isabella. Your sister Maria has been very interesting since your funeral. So has your business partner James. So have a lot of people who supposedly mourned your passing. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear traffic in the background, city sounds, the charity dinner next week. The voice continued. Table 7, as the text said, come alone, come as Victoria Ashford, and come prepared to learn just how many people were happy to see Isabella Hartwell dead. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Someone else knew I was alive. Someone had been monitoring my surveillance of David and Rebecca. Someone who seemed to know more about my situation than I did myself. I turned back to the wedding footage, studying faces in the crowd more carefully. My sister Maria, laughing at something Rebecca had said. My business partner James, clinking glasses with David during the toast. My former colleagues, my old friends, even my own mother-in-law, all celebrating the union of the grieving widower and his new love. Had they all known about the affair? Had they all been complicit in some way? Or was there something deeper, something I'd missed even in my careful planning of my own disappearance? I opened a new document and began making lists. Everyone at the wedding. Everyone who'd known about David and Rebecca's relationship. Everyone who'd benefited from my death in some way. The picture that emerged was more complex than simple adultery and insurance fraud. My disappearance had created a power vacuum at my consulting firm. James had immediately stepped into my role, taking over my clients and my contracts. My sister Maria had been named executor of my estate, giving her access to assets David couldn't immediately claim. Even my secretary, Patricia, had been promoted to a management role she'd been coveting for years. Everyone had gained something from Isabella Hartwell's death. The wedding footage played on in the background as I worked, the sound of celebration and joy providing a soundtrack to my growing understanding of just how thoroughly I'd been betrayed, not just by a cheating husband and a faithless friend, but by an entire network of people who'd found my absence more valuable than my presence. I paused the video on a frame showing David's toast. His face was radiant with happiness, his arm around Rebecca's waist, my grandmother's ring sparkling on her finger. Behind them, my portrait sat on the mantelpiece, a memorial to the wife whose death had made this moment possible. The anonymous caller was right. I needed to attend the charity dinner, not just to confront David and Rebecca, but to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Victoria Ashford would make her social debut, and Isabella Hartwell would begin her resurrection. But first, I had preparations to make. If they wanted to play games with a dead woman, they were about to learn that the dead had advantages the living couldn't imagine. They'd already buried me once. It was time to return the favor. I closed the laptop and walked to my secure safe, pulling out the documents I'd prepared months ago, but never used. The ones that would allow Isabella Martinez to become Victoria Ashford permanently if necessary. But I also pulled out something else, the evidence file I'd compiled before my disappearance. Insurance against David if he ever tried to claim I'd abandoned him. That file contained information about David's embezzlement from his law firm, his manipulation of client settlements, and his creative accounting practices that bordered on money laundering. I'd gathered the evidence to protect myself during what I'd thought would be a messy divorce. Now it might serve a different purpose entirely. The charity dinner was in 6 days. 6 days to become Victoria Ashford completely. 6 days to prepare for my first public appearance since my death. 6 days to get ready to walk back into the world that had buried me and see who would be surprised to find me still breathing. I opened my laptop one more time and began shopping for the perfect dress. After all, if you're going to return from the dead, you might as well look killer doing it. The security footage continued playing in the background. David and Rebecca's wedding reception unfolding in the garden I'd designed, surrounded by the people I'd trusted, celebrating the love story that had begun with my betrayal and would end with my revenge. Tomorrow, I would begin the final phase of my resurrection. Not the quiet, invisible return I'd once planned, but something far more dramatic. They'd thought they were burying Isabella Hartwell forever. They were about to learn that some burials don't take. The timer on my phone chimed midnight. Officially, it was 6 months and 1 day since my death. Time to start living again, and time to make sure that everyone who'd benefited from my absence would pay the price for their celebration. After all, the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served at exactly the moment when your enemies feel most secure in their victory. And judging by the wedding footage, David and Rebecca had never felt more secure in their lives. That was about to change. The transformation from Isabella Martinez back to a version of my former self required more than just buying a new dress. I spent 3 days crafting Victoria Ashford's backstory with the same precision I'd once used to plan corporate security systems. The fictional tech entrepreneur needed a digital footprint that would withstand scrutiny from David's legal contacts and Rebecca's naturally suspicious nature. Victoria's LinkedIn profile appeared first, complete with a carefully curated career history at several Silicon Valley startups that had either been acquired or gone defunct, convenient for avoiding verification calls. Her social media presence was minimal but authentic, populated with stock photos from business conferences and strategic networking events. The key was making her successful enough to afford a premium table at the charity dinner, but not so notable that anyone would question why they hadn't heard of her before. The hardest part was the physical transformation. 6 months of exile had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The stress of living a double life had sharpened my features, and my naturally dark hair was now a sophisticated silver-streaked brown. Professional styling would complete the metamorphosis, but I needed to be unrecognizable to people who'd known Isabella Hartwell intimately while still being attractive enough to command attention. My secure phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Marcus Webb has been asking questions about his client, Victoria Ashford. Might want to handle that before Saturday. The message sent a chill through me. Marcus, the private investigator I'd hired to research David, was now apparently investigating his own client. Someone was playing a deeper game than I'd realized, pulling strings I couldn't yet see. I needed to move quickly. First stop, Marcus Webb's office. The private investigation firm operated out of a converted warehouse in Queens, the kind of place that valued discretion over aesthetics. Marcus's office was a maze of filing cabinets and computer equipment, with enough surveillance gear to stock a small government agency. The man himself was younger than his voice suggested, early 40s, with the wary eyes of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. "Ms. Ashford," he said, not rising from his desk when his secretary showed me in. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to meet you in person." "Business brings me to New York more often now," I replied, settling into the worn leather chair across from him. "I wanted to thank you personally for your thorough work on the Hartwell investigation." Marcus studied my face with professional interest. "You know, it's the strangest thing. I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've never had a client who knew so exactly what they were looking for. Almost like you already knew what I'd find." I kept my expression neutral. "Intuition. When you've been betrayed before, you learn to recognize the patterns." "Betrayed before," he repeated, making a note on his pad. "And what was your connection to Isabella Hartwell, if you don't mind me asking? You never mentioned knowing the deceased personally." The question hung in the air between us. Marcus wasn't just making conversation, he was fishing. Someone had paid him to dig deeper, to question the client who'd hired him to investigate her own husband. "I didn't know her personally," I said carefully, "but women in business sometimes hear things through networks. Isabella Hartwell had a reputation. When I heard about David's quick remarriage, it seemed worth investigating whether it was genuine grief or something more calculated." Marcus nodded slowly. "And now that you have your answer?" "Now I'm satisfied that my instincts were correct." I stood to leave. "I trust our business relationship ends here? I'd hate for anyone to know I was curious enough about a stranger's marriage to hire an investigator." "Of course," Marcus said, but his eyes remained calculating. "Though I should mention, someone else has been asking about Victoria Ashford. Might want to be careful about that digital footprint. Sometimes new identities attract unwanted attention." I paused at the door. "What kind of attention?" "The kind that comes from very rich, very connected people who don't like mysteries in their social circles. David Hartwell has friends in interesting places." Outside Marcus's office, I sat in my rental car processing the implications. David wasn't just suspicious, he was actively investigating potential threats. Which meant Victoria Ashford needed to be beyond reproach when she walked into the charity dinner. My next stop was the most difficult, confronting the people who'd helped arrange my death. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been my contact in Montenegro, a forensic pathologist whose gambling debts had made her amenable to creative interpretations of accident scenes. Our arrangement had been simple: Stage the evidence of my death in exchange for enough money to clear her obligations and start fresh. She'd held up her end perfectly. Too perfectly, I now realized. The encrypted video call connected after 3 rings. Elena's face appeared on screen, older and more tired than I remembered. "Isabella," she said without preamble, "I wondered when you would call. You've been monitoring my communications? Someone has been asking questions about the Montenegro accident. Someone with resources and connections to very unpleasant people." Elena's accent made her words sound more ominous. "They wanted to know if the body could be recovered, if there were any inconsistencies in my report." I felt the walls closing in. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. But they offered me 10 times what you paid to change my story. To say I was mistaken about the identity, that perhaps someone else died in that accident." The screen flickered as Elena shifted in her chair. Behind her, I could see packed boxes. She was preparing to run. "How long do I have?" I asked. They expect an answer by tomorrow. "But Isabella, there's something else. The questions they asked, they weren't trying to prove you were alive. They were trying to prove someone else was dead." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "They had photographs, dental records, DNA samples they wanted me to match to the accident scene. Someone wanted to use your staged death to cover a real murder." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at a blank screen. I immediately tried calling back, but Elena's number was disconnected. She was already gone, fleeing to whatever safe house she'd prepared for this possibility. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. David and Rebecca hadn't just been planning to kill me, they'd intended to use the Montenegro location I'd chosen to dispose of someone else's body. My fake death had inadvertently prevented a real murder, but now that someone knew I was alive, they needed to tie up loose ends. I drove back to my apartment through increasingly paranoid thoughts. Every car seemed to be following me. Every pedestrian appeared to be watching. If David had discovered I was alive, if he knew about Victoria Ashford's inquiries, then the charity dinner had become more than a dramatic reveal. It had become a trap. But whose trap was it? My apartment's security system showed no signs of intrusion, but I swept for bugs anyway. The anonymous caller who'd been texting me clearly had resources and inside information. Either they were trying to help me, or they were manipulating me towards some predetermined outcome. The charity dinner was 2 days away. I needed backup plans, exit strategies, and insurance policies. Most importantly, I needed to understand who else was playing this game and what they ultimately wanted. I opened my secure laptop and began drafting a document that would serve as my dead man's switch, evidence of everything I'd discovered, automatically sent to law enforcement and media contacts if I failed to check in regularly. If David and Rebecca were planning to make my death permanent this time, they'd find themselves exposed to more than just adultery charges. The Foundation's guest list had arrived that morning, delivered by courier to Victoria Ashford's temporary office. Scanning the names, I recognized most of them, the same social circle that had attended my funeral, David and Rebecca's wedding, and every major charity event for the past decade. But there were new additions, people I didn't recognize with corporate affiliations that seemed oddly specific. 3 guests were listed as representing Kozlov Industries, a shipping company I'd never heard of, but that owned half the container traffic through Newark Port. 2 more claimed affiliation with Meridian Holdings, which appeared to be a shell company when I researched it. Someone had purchased an entire table of seats for people who existed only on paper. My phone rang. The number was different, but I recognized the voice immediately. "You're asking the wrong questions," the anonymous caller said without preamble. "Then what should I be asking?" "Start with why David chose Rebecca." "Not for love, you've figured out that much. But why her specifically? What did she bring to the relationship besides convenience?" I thought about Rebecca's background. Marketing executive originally from Vancouver, no close family in the area. She'd moved to New York 5 years ago for work, right around the time she'd entered our social circle. Her resume was impressive but not remarkable, her social connections limited to people she'd met through David and me. "She was isolated," I said slowly. "No local family, no deep roots. The perfect accomplice. Closer. Think about her previous work experience. Think about the companies she'd been associated with before moving to New York. I pulled up Rebecca's employment history on my laptop. Marketing positions at several mid-level companies, nothing that stood out. But as I dug deeper into the corporate structures, patterns emerged. 3 of her former employers had been subsidiaries of larger organizations with ties to international shipping. One had been investigated by the FBI for money laundering before quietly dissolving. She's not just an accomplice, I breathed. She's a professional. Now you're getting somewhere. The charity dinner isn't just David's social debut with his new wife. It's a business meeting, and the product being sold is you. The line went dead, leaving me with more questions than answers. If Rebecca was a professional criminal, what was her organization planning to do with proof of my fake death? What business meeting required my presence, dead or alive? I spent the rest of the day researching Rebecca's connections more deeply. The trail led through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. But the pattern that emerged was clear. Rebecca Chen was connected to a sophisticated operation that specialized in identity theft, insurance fraud, and what the FBI classified as death services, crimes that required someone to be officially dead. My fake death hadn't been an inconvenience to their plans. It had been a gift. They could use Isabella Hartwell's established death certificate for any number of criminal enterprises, while I remained safely hidden as Victoria Ashford. The charity dinner was likely their way of introducing me to potential buyers, people who needed clean identities and were willing to pay premium prices. But there was still one question that bothered me. If Rebecca and David were running a criminal enterprise based on my death, why were they living so publicly? The wedding, the social events, the high-profile charity work, none of it fit the profile of people trying to stay hidden, unless staying hidden had never been the point. The charity dinner was tomorrow night. Whatever was going to happen, I needed to be ready for multiple scenarios. Victoria Ashford would attend as planned, but Isabella Martinez would be watching from the shadows, prepared to disappear again if necessary. I spent my final day of preparation creating additional backup identities and escape routes. Cash hidden in multiple locations, forged documents cached in safety deposit boxes across 3 states, and a completely clean identity waiting in a storage unit in Philadelphia. If this was truly a trap, I wouldn't be caught the way Elena had been. The dress I'd chosen was perfect, elegant enough for the charity dinner's dress code, but practical enough to run in if necessary. I'd had it tailored to conceal a small recording device and a GPS tracker that would broadcast my location to multiple servers. Whatever happened tomorrow night, there would be evidence. My reflection looked back at me from the full-length mirror, and for a moment I saw Isabella Hartwell again, the woman who'd tried to escape her life by faking her death, only to discover that death wasn't always permanent, and sometimes the people trying to kill you were more dangerous than the life you were running from. Tomorrow, Victoria Ashford would walk into the Hartwell Foundation charity dinner. She would smile at David, shake hands with Rebecca, and pretend to be a stranger interested in supporting women's causes. She would listen to David's keynote speech about carrying on his late wife's legacy while sitting at table 7 with mysterious guests from Kozloff Industries, and if everything went according to plan, Isabella Hartwell would finally get the answers she needed to decide whether to stay dead or come back to life. Permanently. The charity dinner was more than a confrontation. Now, it was a reckoning with everyone who'd benefited from my disappearance. But as I prepared for tomorrow's performance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far more dangerous than simple revenge. After all, the dead have advantages, but they also have vulnerabilities. And in a room full of people who thought they'd already killed me once, those vulnerabilities could be fatal. The Riverside Manor ballroom glittered with chandelier light and the practiced smiles of New York's charity elite. I arrived fashionably late as Victoria Ashford, my entrance time to avoid the receiving line where David and Rebecca stood greeting guests. From across the room I could see them playing, their roles perfectly, the grieving widower who'd found love, again and his devoted new wife carrying on the deceased's charitable. Worked table 7 was positioned strategically near the back, with clear sightlines to the head table where David would deliver his keynote speech. My tablemates were already seated when I arrived. 3 men in expensive suits who introduced themselves with names I knew were false, and 2 women whose elegant appearances couldn't hide the calculating intelligence behind their eyes. Ms. Ashford. The man to my right extended his hand. Victor Kozlov. We've been looking forward to meeting you. The accent was faint but unmistakable. Eastern European, probably Russian. His handshake lingered a moment too long, and I caught him studying my face with professional interest. The pleasure is mine, I replied, settling into my seat. I've heard wonderful things about your shipping company's charitable work. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. We believe in supporting causes that help people disappear from difficult situations. The Foundation's work with women escaping domestic violence aligns perfectly with our interests. The double meaning wasn't subtle. Around the table, the other guests watched our exchange with barely concealed amusement. Whatever business meeting this was supposed to be, I was clearly the entertainment. The woman across from me leaned forward. Maria Castellanos, she introduced herself. I represent several clients who require specialized documentation services. Victoria, isn't it? Such an unusual name for someone in tech. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and David's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to honor the memory of Isabella Hartwell and continue her vital work supporting women in crisis. I watched him from the shadows, noting how comfortable he appeared on stage. The grieving widower persona had been replaced by confident authority as he spoke about carrying on my legacy. Behind him, a slideshow played featuring photos of me at various foundation events, images I'd never authorized for public use. Isabella believed that every woman deserved the chance to start over, to leave behind situations that threatened their safety and well-being. She understood that sometimes disappearing was the only path to survival. The irony was suffocating. David was describing my own fake death while positioning himself as the guardian of my charitable mission. But as he continued speaking, I realized the speech wasn't just commemorating my death. It was advertising a service. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce the expansion of the Hartwell Foundation's relocation program. Through partnerships with international organizations, his gaze swept toward Table 7, we'll be able to help women not just escape their circumstances, but truly disappear when their lives depend on it. Victor leaned closer to me. Your late husband has an interesting interpretation of charity work. Death certificates, new identities, complete life histories. Quite comprehensive. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. David wasn't just using my death for insurance money and social sympathy. He was using the foundation I'd created to run an identity laundering operation, selling false deaths and new lives to the highest bidders. The process requires careful documentation, the woman named Maria continued quietly. Someone with your technical expertise might be valuable in ensuring these transitions are permanent. On stage, David was detailing the foundation's new services with the enthusiasm of a salesman pitching luxury products. Rebecca stood beside him, nodding supportively as he described their commitment to helping women leave their old lives behind completely. We've already had remarkable success, David announced. Our first client was able to disappear so thoroughly that even extensive investigation couldn't trace her new identity. She's living proof that with the right resources, anyone can be reborn. He was talking about me. My fake death had become their proof of concept, demonstration that their service worked. But they'd made one critical error. They'd invited the proof of concept to witness their presentation. My secure phone vibrated with a text from the anonymous caller. Recording everything. Exit through kitchen when speech ends. They know who you are. I glanced around the table more carefully. Victor and Maria weren't potential clients. They were existing partners evaluating my suitability for recruitment. The entire dinner had been staged to gauge whether Victoria Ashford could be brought into their operation or whether she represented a threat that needed elimination. David's speech was reaching its crescendo. The Foundation will continue Isabella's work by any means necessary. Some situations require dramatic solutions, and we're prepared to provide them. Applause filled the ballroom as he concluded. During the standing ovation, I noticed subtle movements around the room. Security personnel I didn't recognize had positioned themselves at the exits. Whatever was supposed to happen next, they wanted to ensure nobody left unexpectedly. "Shall we discuss specifics?" Victor asked as the applause died down. "Your background in corporate security systems could be invaluable for our documentation processes." I kept my expression neutral while scanning for escape routes. The kitchen exit my anonymous ally had mentioned was 20 feet away, but I'd have to cross an open space to reach it. The main entrances were clearly blocked by Victor's security team. "I'm certainly interested," I replied carefully, "though I'd need to understand the full scope of your operations before committing to anything," Maria smiled. "Of course. Perhaps you'd like to meet some of our previous clients. See the quality of our work firsthand?" She gestured toward the head table where David and Rebecca were now mingling with guests. But it wasn't them she was indicating. It was the woman standing beside Rebecca, someone I hadn't noticed during the speech. My sister Maria. The shock must have shown on my face because Victor's hand closed around my wrist. "Recognize someone, do you?" Maria was alive, clearly thriving, and wearing an evening gown that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She was also wearing my mother's diamond bracelet, another piece of jewelry David had claimed to donate to charity. "Your sister was our first success story," the woman across from me explained. "Maria Castellanos isn't just my name, it's hers now. Complete identity transfer, financial backing, and a very comfortable life in exchange for her cooperation in staging Isabella Hartwell's death." The ballroom seemed to tilt around me. My own sister had helped fake my death, not to help me escape, but to help David and his partners create their proof of concept. She'd been in on the plan from the beginning. Of course, we had to make some adjustments when the real Isabella decided to disappear on her own, Victor continued. "Very inconvenient timing. We'd already promised clients a demonstration of our services." Through the crowd, I could see Maria approaching our table. Her face showed no recognition, but her movement was purposeful. She'd been sent to confirm my identity. "The kitchen exit is blocked now," Victor noted casually. "My people are quite thorough." The anonymous caller's warning had been accurate but incomplete. They knew who I was, but they'd known for some time. This entire evening had been orchestrated not to recruit Victoria Ashford, but to capture Isabella Hartwell. "You have two choices," Maria, the fake Maria, continued. "Join our operation willingly or provide another type of demonstration for our clients. Either way, Isabella Hartwell remains conveniently dead." My real sister reached our table just as the lights dimmed for what David announced would be a special presentation. On the screens around the ballroom, security footage began playing, not from David and Rebecca's wedding, but from my apartment. They'd been watching me watch them. "Ladies and gentlemen," David's voice filled the room again, "I'd like to introduce you to someone very special. A woman who's been living proof of our services for the past 6 months. The footage showed me in my apartment, researching their activities, planning Victoria Ashford's identity, preparing for this very evening." In the ballroom, confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests tried to understand what they were seeing. My late wife, Isabella Hartwell, who, as you can see, isn't quite as late as we previously reported. The room erupted in shocked gasps and excited whispers. My sister's face appeared on screen as she leaned toward our table. "Hello, Isabella. We've missed you." But something was wrong with the scenario Victor and his partners had constructed. The footage playing on screen was too clear, too comprehensive. Someone had been monitoring their monitoring of me, creating recordings of their recordings. "This is quite a production," I said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Though I'm curious about one thing, David." My voice cut through the confused chatter, amplified by the microphone I'd been wearing all evening. Every word I'd spoken, every revelation from my table mates. had been broadcast through the sound system. David's confident expression faltered as he realized the situation was more complex than he'd anticipated. "If I'm living proof of your services," I continued, standing so the entire ballroom could see me, "then what does that say about your claim that I was your first successful client? After all, I'm the one who faked my own death. You just took credit for it afterward." The screens around the room flickered and changed, now showing the evidence I'd compiled over the past months. David and Rebecca's affair, their planning emails, the insurance fraud, and most damaging of all, recordings of tonight's dinner conversation, where they'd admitted to running a criminal identity laundering operation. Victor's grip on my wrist tightened, but I'd expected that. The bracelet I wore contained a high-voltage charge that sent him reeling backward as soon as he touched the hidden trigger. "The real question," I announced to the stunned ballroom, "is how many people here tonight are using identities purchased from the Hartwell Foundation's special services?" Chaos erupted as guests realized they'd been recorded confessing to various crimes throughout the evening. Security personnel moved to block exits, but they found themselves facing FBI agents who'd been positioned among the serving staff. My anonymous caller stepped out of the shadows behind the head table, removing his waiter's disguise to reveal a federal badge. Agent Michael Torres, I learned later, had been investigating the identity laundering ring for months. "David Hartwell. Rebecca Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and accessory to murder," Torres announced as his team moved in. The mention of murder sent fresh shockwaves through the crowd. As David and Rebecca were led away in handcuffs, Torres explained that they'd used fake death certificates to cover actual murders, selling victims' identities to criminals while disposing of inconvenient bodies. My sister, my real sister Maria, approached cautiously through the chaos. "Isabella? My God, you're really alive," but I backed away from her. "Which Maria are you? The one who helped stage my death? Or the one who's been living my life for the past 6 months?" Her confusion appeared genuine, but I'd learned not to trust appearances. "What are you talking about? You disappeared 6 months ago. David said you'd had an accident in Montenegro. I've been helping him settle your estate." The woman who'd introduced herself as Maria Castellanos was being arrested along with Victor and the others from Table 7. As she was led past us, she smiled at my sister with vicious satisfaction. "Enjoy your guilt. Maria, enjoy wondering if your sister really died in that car accident, or if we arranged something more permanent when she became inconvenient." The seed of doubt was planted perfectly. Even with the criminal network exposed, even with David and Rebecca facing prosecution, I would never be completely certain whether my original escape plan had somehow been compromised, whether someone had actually tried to kill me in Montenegro. But looking at my sister's face, seeing her genuine shock and grief and relief, I realized that some questions might be more dangerous than their answers. The important thing was that Isabella Hartwell was officially alive again. Victoria Ashford could disappear as easily as she'd been created. And the people who'd profited from my death were facing consequences. The FBI would sort out the criminal charges. The media would have a field day with the scandal. And I would have to decide what kind of life to build from the wreckage of everything I'd thought I knew about the people closest to me. As guests were processed and released, as evidence was cataloged and statements taken, I found myself standing in the same ballroom where I'd once celebrated charitable causes with people I'd trusted. Now those same people were either under arrest or looking at me like I'd returned from the dead, which in a way I had. Agent Torres approached as the evening wound down. "Ms. Hartwell, we'll need extensive debriefing about your activities over the past 6 months. Your evidence collection has been invaluable, but there are still questions about how deep this network goes." I nodded, understanding that my resurrection was only the beginning of a much longer process. "What happens to the foundation?" "That depends on how much of its operations were legitimate versus criminal. We'll be conducting a full audit." I thought about all the women the foundation had genuinely helped over the years, all the shelters funded and lives saved through legitimate charitable work. David and Rebecca had corrupted my life's work, but perhaps it could be salvaged and reformed. The ballroom was nearly empty now, crime scene tape marking off areas where evidence had been collected. In a few hours, this would all be front-page news. The dead wife who returned to expose her husband's criminal empire. The fake death that uncovered real murders. The charity dinner that became a sting operation. But for now, I was simply Isabella Hartwell again, alive and ready to reclaim my life from the people who'd stolen it while I was pretending to be dead. The irony wasn't lost on me that the best way to come back from the dead was to walk into a room full of people who thought they'd killed you and prove them wrong. 3 months after the charity dinner that became a federal sting operation, I sat in the rebuilt offices of the Hartwell Foundation, reviewing applications from women who needed genuine help escaping dangerous situations. The irony wasn't lost on me that my fake death had ultimately exposed a real network that preyed on vulnerable people seeking new lives. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed. David and Rebecca both accepted plea bargains rather than face trial, admitting to conspiracy charges in exchange for reduced sentences. David received 12 years in federal prison, Rebecca got 8. The difference reflected her cooperation in exposing the broader network that stretched from New York to Eastern Europe. Viktor Kozlov and his associates were facing extradition to multiple countries where their identity laundering operation had facilitated everything from tax evasion to murder. The fake Maria Castellanos, whose real name turned out to be Elena Petrov, had provided detailed testimony about how they'd infiltrated legitimate charities to create cover for their criminal enterprises. My real sister Maria sat across from my desk, reviewing financial reports with the dedication of someone trying to atone for months of unknowing complicity. The estate she'd helped David liquidate was being painstakingly reconstructed through forensic accounting and asset recovery. The insurance company has agreed to the settlement, she reported, not quite meeting my eyes. They'll recover what they paid David and will get back most of your frozen assets, though they're insisting on a fraud prevention clause for any future policies. I nodded, understanding their caution. A woman who'd successfully faked her own death wasn't exactly a low-risk client for life insurance companies. The psychological aftermath had been more complex than the legal proceedings. Therapy with Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Rebecca, thankfully, was helping me process the layers of betrayal I'd discovered. The woman I'd trusted as my best friend had been surveilling me for over a year, documenting my habits and vulnerabilities to help plan my replacement. The FBI wants to discuss the Montenegro connection again, Maria continued, finally looking up from her reports. Agent Torres thinks there might be other cases where the network used your fake death as a template. That was the aspect that still haunted me. How many other accidents had the network arranged using the methods I'd developed for my own escape? How many real deaths had been disguised using techniques I'd researched to fake my own? Dr. Elena Vasquez, the pathologist who'd helped stage my Montenegro accident, had been found dead in a Prague hotel room 2 weeks after the charity dinner arrests. Officially, it was suicide by overdose. Unofficially, everyone understood that loose ends were being tied up by the surviving members of Victor's organization. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Agent Torres. New development. Can you come in this afternoon? I'd learned to read the subtleties in Torres's communications. New development usually meant they'd uncovered another layer of the criminal network, another victim whose death might have been staged rather than accidental. I need to meet with the FBI again, I told Maria. Can you handle the foundation interviews this afternoon? She nodded eagerly. Maria had thrown herself into the legitimate work of the foundation with the fervor of someone desperate to make amends. The guilt she carried over David's manipulation of her, grief was slowly transforming into determination to honor what she thought my memory should have represented. The federal building in Lower Manhattan had become depressingly familiar over the past months. Agent Torres's office was a maze of case files and evidence boards, with photographs of victims and suspects covering every available wall space. My fake death had opened a door to investigations spanning multiple continents. We've identified 17 cases where the network used your Montenegro model, Torres began without preamble. Staged accidents in remote locations, bodies allegedly lost to natural disasters. death certificates issued by corrupted officials. The pattern is consistent across 3 years of operations. He showed me photographs of missing persons who'd supposedly died in accidents, a businessman who'd allegedly drowned off the Greek coast, a journalist who'd supposedly fallen into a volcano in Indonesia, a whistleblower who'd apparently been lost in an avalanche in the Alps. What we can't determine, Torres continued, is how many of these people actually died versus how many successfully disappeared like you did. The network was selling identities to both willing participants and unwilling victims. The implications were staggering. Some of these missing people might have been murdered to create clean identities for criminals. Others might have been criminals themselves, purchasing new lives through fake deaths. And some might have been innocent people like me, trying to escape situations that had become unbearable. There's something else, Torres said, opening a sealed file. We've been monitoring communications between imprisoned members of the network. They're discussing someone called the Architect, someone who supposedly designed the entire operation, but was never directly involved in implementation. He showed me intercepted messages from Rebecca's prison communications. Even behind bars, she was trying to negotiate reduced sentences by providing information about the network's leadership structure. She claims the Architect was someone with extensive knowledge of corporate security, international law, and identity documentation, someone who understood how to exploit the gaps between different countries' death certification processes. The description was uncomfortably familiar. My own expertise in corporate security had included exactly those areas: protecting companies from identity, theft and documentation fraud required, understanding how those systems could be exploited. You think I inspired their methods? I asked. I think they studied your case very carefully, Torres replied. Your successful disappearance provided a proof of concept they could sell to clients. But the sophistication of their overall operation suggests someone with your level of expertise was involved in the planning. A chill ran through me as I considered the possibility that my own research into faking deaths had been used to facilitate real murders. The irony was that my attempt to escape without hurting anyone had inadvertently provided tools for people who had no such scruples. We need you to review these case files, Torres continued. Look for any patterns that match your own planning process. If we can identify which deaths were genuine versus staged, we might be able to locate survivors or gather evidence for murder prosecutions. The afternoon became a grim exercise in recognizing my own methodology reflected in criminal enterprises. Case after case showed the techniques I'd developed being used for purposes I'd never intended. My careful research into corruption vulnerabilities in international death registration had become a manual for identity laundering operations. By evening, I'd identified 12 cases that showed clear signs of staged deaths rather than actual murders. 12 people who might still be alive, living under identities purchased from Victor's network. The FBI would now have to undertake the delicate process of locating them without alerting the criminals who might be using their original identities. Driving home through Manhattan traffic, I reflected on the unexpected consequences of my personal vendetta. My fake death had been intended as a quiet escape from a failed marriage. Instead, it had triggered a federal investigation that was now unwinding, international criminal networks, and potentially saving lives across multiple countries. The Foundation's new offices were in a different building, one without the emotional baggage of my previous location. The staff was entirely new as well, vetted by both the FBI and private security firms to ensure no remaining connections to the criminal network. We were starting over completely, building something honest from the ashes of what had been corrupted. Jennifer Walsh, the Foundation's new director, had stayed late to prepare for tomorrow's board meeting. She'd been recommended by 3 different law enforcement agencies as someone with both the nonprofit experience and security clearance needed to run an organization that had been infiltrated by international criminals. The applications are getting more complex, she reported as I entered her office. Word has spread about our enhanced security screening. Women who are fleeing genuinely dangerous situations are seeking us out specifically because they know we can provide protection that other organizations can't. The Foundation's reputation had been transformed by the scandal. Instead of being destroyed by revelation of David's criminal activities, it had emerged as a model for how charitable organizations could protect vulnerable populations from sophisticated predators. Our enhanced screening processes, developed with FBI consultation, were being copied by nonprofits worldwide. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "We've been contacted by 3 women who think they might be connected to the identity network. They're living under assumed names, but want to know if their original identities are safe to reclaim." This was the most delicate aspect of the Foundation's new work. Some people who'd purchased identities from Victor's network had been genuine victims trying to escape domestic violence or other threats. Others had been criminals hiding from law enforcement. Determining which was which required careful coordination with multiple agencies. My phone rang with a call from an international number. I'd learned to be suspicious of such calls, but this one came through the secure line Torres had provided for emergencies. "Isabella Hartwell?" The voice was female, accented, frightened, speaking. "My name was Anna Volkov. I read about your case in the newspapers. I think I bought your death." The words sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" "The network, the one that was arrested. I paid them for a new identity 3 years ago. They gave me documents, a death certificate, a complete history. But the name on the certificate was Isabella Martinez, supposedly died in Montenegro in 2024. Isabella Martinez. The identity I'd used while in hiding. Supposedly a completely clean creation. But if Anna Volkov was right, it hadn't been clean at all. It had been stolen from someone whose death the network had staged years before my own disappearance. "Are you safe?" I asked, for now. But if Isabella Martinez was a real person who died, then I've been living someone else's life. And if the network staged her death like they staged yours, then maybe she's still alive too. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Anna providing details about how she'd purchased her new identity and what documents she'd been given. Everything matched the network's standard procedures, but with one critical difference. She'd been told her identity was completely fabricated, not knowing it belonged to someone who'd supposedly died in an accident. After the call ended, I sat in the Foundation offices considering the implications. How many Isabella Martinezes were there? How many people were living under identities that belonged to others who might still be alive? The network's operations were more extensive and more cruel than anyone had realized. I called Torres immediately. "We have a bigger problem than we thought. The identities they were selling weren't all fabricated. Some belonged to people whose deaths they'd staged, people who might still be alive." The investigation would expand again, searching for victims who didn't know they were victims, people whose identities had been stolen through staged deaths while they rebuilt their lives elsewhere. Some, like me, had chosen their own disappearances. Others, like Anna Volkov, had unknowingly purchased stolen lives from people who'd been murdered to create clean identities. 6 months after walking into the charity dinner as Victoria Ashford, I was still discovering the full extent of how my fake death had been weaponized by criminals. But I was also seeing how it could be used for good. The Foundation was now helping people escape dangerous situations safely and legally, with proper law enforcement coordination and protection. The personal cost had been enormous. My marriage was destroyed, my trust in human nature severely damaged, and my sense of identity forever complicated by having been both victim and inadvertent accomplice to international crime. But the broader impact was positive. A criminal network dismantled, genuine victims helped, and new systems created to protect vulnerable populations as I locked the Foundation offices and headed home to my new apartment, purchased under my real name for the first time in over a year. I reflected on the strange journey from death back to life. Isabella Hartwell had died in Montenegro, been reborn as Victoria Ashford for one evening, and was now being reconstructed as someone entirely new, a survivor who understood both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of people trying to reinvent themselves. The FBI investigation would continue for years. The Foundation's work would expand internationally, and somewhere in the world, other Isabella Martinezes were living lives built on deaths that might not have been real. My fake death had saved more lives than I'd ever imagined possible, including my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the people who wronged you. It's transforming their crimes into opportunities to help others avoid the same fate. The dead, I'd learned, have more power than the living realize. But the truly powerful know when to come back to life and use that power for something bigger than personal vengeance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.